You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. Manny Dosanjh, welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp.
Andrew, man, appreciate you having me, man. I've listened to a lot of your episodes, man. Honored to be here.
Manny, it's great to have you here. And you and I caught up a few weeks ago. I know you're a big fan of Everybody Pulls the Tarp. Let's set this up for all of our listeners. Manny is a Michigan State men's basketball graduate assistant, one of the rising up-and-comers in the college basketball Division I coaching ranks. I absolutely love Manny's story. Manny, we'll get into all of it here and share some of this, but Manny's work ethic, Manny's mindset, to develop and cultivate his coaching career has been absolutely fantastic. And I want to share Manny's story with all of you. So Manny, where I want to start is you completely shocked me with a story that you were telling me a few weeks ago about how you would drive over 4 hours each way from Canada to Michigan State to watch the Michigan State basketball team practice before you were on the coaching staff. So Manny, for my listeners, share that story. Let's start right there.
Yeah, kind of, Andrew, you hit on the head. Was so fortunate to, get introduced to the staff here early in my career. I used to be an assistant coach at Orangeville Prep Canada. Another school actually recruited one of our players, and he knew the staff here. And so one day he told me, hey, Manny, why don't you go up to Michigan State and watch their practice? So I remember my first trip to Michigan State. I remember being in the parking lot, called my fiance, and I said, hey, I made it here. I don't think this is a good idea. I don't want to disturb what they have going on. I'm just going to turn back, man. I'll be home in 4.5 hours. And she's like, nope, you're there now. Go in there, go learn, and things are going to be all right. And so I still remember my first practice. They came back from a road trip against Rutgers. The way it all started, Andrew, is, so I went in and sat far in the bleachers, didn't want to be seen, just want to take notes. Coach Izzo, being the way he is, he saw me. I remember him just kind of waving me down, man, come closer, sit up at these chairs. I think it was that moment where it was just whoa, I was just trying to stay out the way. And coach said, man, come on closer. And Coach Izzo was talking to me about what they were doing and walking me through the drills. And so from that point forward, Coach Izzo really just made me feel so comfortable on my visit, along with all the other coaches. I mean, Coach David Thomas, Coach DJ, Wojcik, all great coaches who have been in the profession for a long time. And so they made me feel so comfortable my first visit that I just really wanted to keep on learning. I just kind of had this bug in me, where I just wanted more. From that point forward, every time I would have a day off at Orangeville Prep, which is about 4.5 hour drive, depending on how the border was, I would drive up to Michigan State. I would text one of the coaches and be like, Coach, can I come up and just watch practice? And they would say yes every time, which I'm so grateful for. And so I would drive up, I'd watch practice, and I'd drive right back home. I pretty much did that on all my off days, and there weren't many off days at Orangeville because of the schedule we played. But the ones I did have, that was kind of my off day, man. Just at Michigan State, just watching practice, taking notes, and learning everything that I could.
So Manny, every time I hear that story, I just get a huge smile on my face because, that's at its core, one of the ultimate tarp pulls, right? On this show, week in, week out, we talk about examples and stories of people who go above and beyond, people who do things that are just not expected, but make a huge difference on their team, their organization, and their own career. In your case, you saw an opportunity. You saw an opportunity to drive 4.5 hours each way on your off day when you could have been relaxing and catching up on your own, on your own time, to learn, to develop your craft, become a better coach. It clearly left an impression on Coach Izzo, who's an absolute legend in college basketball, in coaching in general. But I'm curious, what were some of the biggest takeaways that you had when you invested all that time just to go sit and observe a legendary college basketball program, a legendary leader in Coach Izzo. What were some of your big takeaways from just sitting in the stands watching practice?
The biggest thing that stood out to me, Andrew, when I first used to come watch is just the relationship that the staff had with their players. And the way that was evident was by how hard these guys practiced. If you come in here, if you were to come here one time and watch practice, it really kind of takes you back on the level of intensity, the engagement, the togetherness of what this program really stands for. And so the more and more I came here, Coach Izzo would let me sit down in meetings sometimes on my visits. And so I got to see that they've invested so much in these players off the floor that when those guys are between the lines, they're ready to run through a wall for the coaching staff. And that was one of the biggest things that I took away, just having that, how critical it is for a staff to have that relationship so the guys can pour everything they have out on the floor for you.
Relationships are so important, in sports, in business, in all aspects of life, Manny. I'm curious, now that you've been behind the curtain and you're on the staff at Michigan State, how do you go about building relationships? Or what are some of the lessons in relationship building that anyone can take away from your experience so far? How do you impact people that way and build those relationships?
Yeah, I think, Andrew, we all first, it's well known that people throw the word genuine around, being genuine every time, but I think it comes with the word giving. I think the more you're able to give, I think that's how relationships blossom. I've always lived by a rule, Andrew. I never ask for anything of my newly relationships until I'm at least a year in. I just want to give some more, provide value to that relationship until at least a year. And even then, sometimes you don't feel like asking. Sometimes we have a hard time asking for anything. And so I felt like that's always one of some of my strongest relationships have formed because I've always just tried to provide value to that person and give to that person without anything in return. And if I did need something from that person, if I needed, let's say, a favor, if I needed whatever it was, I try to usually wait at least one full calendar year before I ask for anything in return, and more so make sure I provide value to that person for at least our first year of that relationship.
It's really interesting, Manny. A mentor told me really early in my career that you want to be a net giver, that you want to give more than you take. And if you give enough to the people in your network, the people surrounding you, you will, in all likelihood, get enough in return to be successful, to achieve what you want to achieve. I've never necessarily, put a time scenario around it like you described there. Like you've got that fundamental, I'm going to give for a year, and then I might ask for some help. I might request of their time. It's a really interesting philosophy. Where did you first learn that mindset?
I think it happened. I can't exactly point of where I actually got it from. I actually thought about that today, because that's something I wanted to share. I think I learned it on early in my career when I wanted to become a coach. And I think so much of this business and profession is so-called networking. That's a term that people throw around in relationships. And so with this business being a relationship-oriented business, people are always kind of, hungry to make that next move or find that next opportunity, and oftentimes it does come through somebody that you know. And so, I wish I knew, but I can't quite pinpoint where I got that from, but I can quite honestly say it's worked out for me really well in my career so far, and it doesn't have to be a year, it can be 6 to 8 months. It can be however long you feel like, but if you cannot ask somebody for a favor for a year or find something along those lines, then you're on the path for it to be a genuine relationship, and that's what I think has really been good on that end.
I think that's right, Manny, because I think if you approach every interaction thinking that you're going to get something in return, someone's going to give you a job, someone's going to give you a new business, they're going to give you a spot on a team. If you approach every interaction thinking that you're going to receive something, you're going to walk through life incredibly disappointed, in my opinion, right? Because you're always going to kind of set yourself up for this failure because that's just not how the world works, right? You can have all the, interests and desires and think that you're entitled to things, but at the end of the day, you have to be willing to put in the work. You have to be willing to build, you use that word, genuine relationships. So I want to pick it up there, Manny. So you build these relationships by coming on your off days. You drive 4.5. Let's just reiterate this. What a powerful story, right? You drive 4.5 hours each way, 4.5 hours. You watch practice. You drive 4.5 hours back. While you're at practice, you're watching. Coach Izzo starts to, tell you to, come closer to the floor, get a little closer. He lets you participate in meetings and shadow, more folks on the staff. When do they actually offer you a spot? How does that happen?
Yeah, so it happened about a year later after I gained a relationship with that staff. After about a year, I hadn't got my master's degree yet, and the staff knew that just through our relationship. And, it's amazing. I kind of credit this all to God, the way it all kind of fell together, but it was so many different, I kind of had, I want to say, a relationship from so many different streams within the program. For example, David Thomas, who's one of my mentors and a director of operations here, he's also Canadian. One of my mentors is cousins with one of the assistant coaches here. One of my players who went out to play at a smaller Division I school, his coach played for an assistant here. And so the staff had so many different streams, where they could identify if I was the right fit for their program. It got to the point, Andrew, where I just had visited so much because Coach Izzo made me feel so comfortable that at this point, they kind of knew what I was about and what I stood for. It's amazing how God's timing works. I didn't play at Michigan State. I wasn't a manager here. And so it just shows sometimes, just the power when God has a plan for you and when the timing fits. When that position came open, it was just a fit for both sides.
Well, and I don't know if everybody realizes, right, just how rare it is for a coach like Tom Izzo to give a graduate assistant role to somebody who didn't play in the program, really didn't have anything to do with the program. It's one of the most coveted spots in college sports, that graduate assistant role. It's just a testament to the relationships. I mean, you've said it a few times. I keep coming back to relationships and networking. And in business, I've seen throughout my career the power of networking. I went to another Big Ten school, Penn State, as you and I have talked about. And one of the things that I've been able to do relatively well in my career is harness the power of the Penn State network. Penn State has the largest living alumni network in the world, and I've a lot of my career giving to the Penn State community, not necessarily money, but time, talent, experience, things like that. Mentoring students in the business school. I volunteered to set up the Greater Washington, D.C. chapter of the Penn State Business School Alumni Association. My mindset was always give back to the university community, give to other students, give to other alums, and create this network around me, which has been very, very helpful. But I think it's the same for you. What you've done is built this fantastic network where you've tapped into different aspects of your life, and you've gone about the relationships with the mindset of, I'm going to give, and then I might receive. So now that you're on the staff, what's that like? You're a graduate assistant. Tell me about that role so I understand entirely, what's involved with the role you have now.
Yeah. So the GA role is you're pretty much on staff, usually a younger guy getting into the business, and you're doing your master's degree while also learning every day on the job. And so GA responsibilities include video breakdown, assistance with player development, opponent scouting, academics, and pretty much anything and everything the staff may need, and it's kind of a role where, like you said, it's hard to be a graduate assistant anywhere. It's just so many, it's only X amount of positions and everybody wants them because of how valuable they are, and they're just a blessing because you get to shadow a coaching staff every single day, while earning your master's degree as well. And so it teaches you time management, it teaches you what it takes to be successful at this level, but it also allows you to touch every single aspect of the program, and I think that's where the highest value is in being a GA.
What would you say is the biggest difference between an elite program like Michigan State men's basketball and other programs that you've been around, the high school ranks, things like that? What's the biggest difference?
Andrew, I think it really comes down to the word culture is thrown around a lot these days. But Coach Izzo really has a saying. He says, there's players that like the game, there's players that love the game, and then there's players that live the game. Being here at Michigan State, I was able to really see that firsthand. And what I picked up was, Andrew, it wasn't just the players, it was our staff who also lived the game. And so seeing those guys show up to work every day, attack their jobs, seeing our players show up, attack their jobs, even guys that are on their support staff, our equipment manager, the janitor, it really always felt like everybody, lives their job and tries to put their best foot forward every day. And I think that was one of the biggest things that I picked up, within my second or third month here, that, wow, like that's not just a saying around here. People really live this, which is why this program has been so successful, for the past X amount of years.
What's one thing you've learned from Coach Tom Izzo, maybe that surprised you?
Ooh, that's a good one. What about Coach Izzo, man? You see, Coach Izzo, you learn something new about him every day. I think what really surprised me about Coach Izzo is I think the outside would never know how much Coach Izzo cares and pours into these guys that has nothing to do with basketball. I'm talking about academics. I'm talking about family. I'm talking about opportunities when they're done playing here. A lot of Coach Izzo's time and energy is consumed on things that are not even basketball related. And I know a lot of head coaches also are like that around the country. But just seeing Coach Izzo go the extra mile to make sure one of his alma mater guys are taken care of, or making sure that if one of the guys' GP isn't where it needs to be, Coach Izzo's on it. And I think the outside perception will never think that because of everything that Coach Izzo has achieved. It's amazing, Andrew. There's been, obviously, in Coach Izzo's time here, there's been players that have gone through difficult times, whatever that would be with families and anything like that. And oftentimes, the parents of these families have relied on Coach Izzo to either share a tough message with the player or be the one to counsel the player. And I think that speaks volumes of who Coach Izzo is. So I've kind of saw that last summer where one of our players went through a tough time with his family, and the mother called Coach Izzo to relay the news to her son, and I thought that was just so powerful. And that really defines to me what a coach truly is.
That is so powerful, Manny. I'm thinking back to a couple of other conversations I've had on the show here. One with 15-time SEC Volleyball Coach of the Year, Mary Wise. And she told me that her philosophy for the more than 3 decades that she's been at an elite level coaching is person over player. That she looks at every person in the program as the person that they are, not as the player. And if she's only focused on production, or if the program is only focused on their production on the volleyball court, then they've failed. That the program is going to be built around caring about the person over the player. And it's interesting to hear you talk about essentially the similar concept and how critical it is to building the culture and the program that you guys have there at Michigan State and East Lansing. So I'm curious, how did you go about, stepping into the role that you're in, jumping into that place where you're trying to build really strong relationships with the players? How do you do that? It's one thing for Coach Izzo to do that. He's been there a long time and he's got a lot of history. How do you do it as somebody new in the program?
I think it all starts with showing these guys how invested you are in them. They don't care about how much I know because I'm not in that position. So it's not my job to talk X's and O's with them. That's not what it's about. In this role, it's about helping these guys, and the way I attacked it, Andrew, is before I even got to Michigan State, I watched every single shot that every single player on the roster took the year before. And so the reason I did that was because I wanted to understand their game inside out. I wanted to know their strengths, their weaknesses. I wanted to memorize their numbers. I wanted to know where they can get better. And so when I came into the program, even though these guys didn't know me, I knew them as if I'd already been around them for 2 years, and just through our conversations, I was able to express how much I knew about them just organically, talking about their 3-point percentage or talking about their effective moves. And so, why they only go right, some of their weaknesses. And through that conversation, I think I was able to really show the players how invested I was in their development as players and also as people, and I think that's the biggest thing right there, it's just showing how invested you are in them, and it's not about you. And I think once players at this level understand that, I think the relationship goes a very long way, because it's all about trust at the end of the day. It's your job to attain their trust, and it takes time. But if you put the work in beforehand and afterhand and work in the middle, it all just takes care of itself.
Manny, every time you and I talk, I learn something new, and I'm more and more amazed at your work ethic. So how did the players respond? Were they surprised that you knew so much about them?
I wouldn't say surprised. I would just say they were, I think, like, for example, like we had a player, Gabe Brown last year, and that was one of the first people that I had a chance to work with while I was on staff. And so I remember talking to him like, Gabe, like in order for you to be successful, like we got to make sure we increase that 3-point percentage. You shoot X, then we got to get to Y, and I just remember him just looking at me, and you could just tell that he was kind of bought in instantly because he had seen that I invested time with him without even knowing him on a personal level, and so I think it's all just organic. I think you just got to find ways to, like I said, build their trust, and that was one of the ways that I was able to do so. That's something that, I tell every young coach that wants to be a GA. That's kind of my advice to them. Know these guys inside out before you get on campus, so when you do get on campus, you can hit the ground running.
Now, we've got people listening who are in all types of careers, at different phases of their career, different industries, coaching, not in coaching, in business, just navigating life in general. And I think there's an important point here. It's preparation, right? I tell people all the time, I'm never going to be the smartest person in a room. I'm never going to be the most athletic person in the room, but nobody's going to be in a room where they can out-prepare me. I'm always going to do the work. I'm always going to be super, super prepared. I've had this philosophy since I started my career that if the information is publicly available on the internet, on a company's website, then you really shouldn't ask it in a meeting. When you're going to meet someone, when you're going to pitch services to a company, you're going to, you're interviewing for a job, don't ask a question that you can find the answer to on Google or anywhere on the internet, right? That's been a philosophy I have. And I think that's been a separator for me. I think that's been a differentiator, because I think when you go into a meeting, especially when you're meeting with people and you're working with people who have limited time, have lots of people vying for their attention, you don't get the chance to ask a million questions, right? You might get the chance to ask 2 or 3 questions of a supervisor or a leader in that given moment. So you have to make the questions and you have to make your contributions stand out and be impactful. And I think that's what you did there. You didn't essentially say, it's almost like it shows this respect, in my opinion, right? As I think about what you were sharing there, it comes down to respect. I think what you show these elite athletes at Michigan State is, I respect your time. I respect you as a person. I've put in the work, and now I've got some ideas to share with you. And that essentially accelerates the relationship building. I think that's what you're saying there as I think about it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Andrew. And what comes to my mind when you say those words is also like in the stream of business, in the stream of sports, in the stream of just everyday life, there is so much we don't control. There's more we don't control than we do. And I've always tried to remember that, whether it comes to opening a new business, a relationship, a promotion, just an idea, there might be some stuff that aren't in your control. And so I always felt like if there's something that is in your control, you have to dominate it, and it's almost a non-negotiable, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that comes across your plate that you won't be able to control. So I think that's to add on that. I think, you absolutely hit on the head. And, in preparation, if there's something that you can do to be more prepared, it's a non-negotiable. You almost have to do it, because there's going to be a lot of it where you're not going to have a choice and it's be out of your hands.
So what you're saying there, Manny, dominate the things you can control, because there's so much that you're not going to be able to control.
No question. I think I picked that up the first time from a book called Above the Line from Urban Meyer, and it was an equation like E plus R equals O. The event plus your response equals the outcome. The event we oftentimes don't control. We don't control COVID-19. We don't control oftentimes taxes and stuff like that, but we always control our response to a situation. And based on that response, you ultimately dictate your outcome. And so I think kind of adding that to the mix as well, where being prepared, controlling what you can, and ultimately having a response to every situation is always in your control.
Manny, you've got such a fantastic perspective, for someone who's so early in their career, early in their coaching career, relatively speaking. You've just absorbed so much, wisdom from those around you, and it's so impressive the work that you do. Has coaching always been something that you wanted to do? You're so passionate about it.
Yeah, it wasn't, Andrew. It wasn't. And the way this came about was when I played in college. I'm at a small school here in Michigan called Delta College. I remember after my freshman year, I would be doing my workouts, trying to get better in the off season, and I had a few of my teammates ask if they could join my workouts. So that for me was like, these are my own teammates, like I go to war with them and they want to join my own workouts. And so I think that's what got the bug rolling a little bit, and then on top of that, I played the point guard spot. I wasn't the most athletic guy on the floor, but always kind of understood the game. And I just loved to watch film with our coaches. And so when I got to combine all those things, it was like, man, like it would be neat to do this every day. Like this wouldn't really feel like a job. I think that's when I realized in college that, this was more of a purpose for me. And it was my job to fulfill that purpose and ultimately glorify, the God doing my everyday job.
I think that's been one of the things that's been really interesting, Manny. We're well over 50 episodes into Everybody Pulls the Tarp, and I've talked to successful people from so many different industries, so many different walks of life, leaders, folks who are doing such fantastic work in so many different areas. And it's been so consistent in terms of the concept that we're talking about right now is that you're a basketball coach, but such a small percentage of what you're doing is really the X's and O's, the technical aspects of basketball. So much of it is everything else, the relationships, building trust, communicating, doing the preparation. You're a basketball coach, but so much of it is applicable to anything in life. If you're the leader of a large company, it's the same thing. What types of relationships do you have? How effectively, are you getting to know your people? It's so interesting, right? And I think it's been one of the things that's been most fascinating for me, especially when I talk to coaches, how little it has to do really with the technical X's and O's of basketball or whatever sport you're coaching.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with that because at the end of the day, Andrew, it's a people's world, like at the end of the day, it's all about the relationship. It's all about helping each other. It's all about making the days on this earth count, really. It's just like what we do as a job, it's what we do, but it's not who we are at the end of the day. We have so much more to give, like love is so powerful, having somebody in your corner for the rest of your life beyond the business or the sport, like that's so powerful, to see different families evolve, like that's powerful, and there's just so much joy in something other than the score of the game or the end report of a business. At the end of the day, we're all just people and, it's our job just to love one another and, help each other grow in whatever areas it is that we're all striving for.
Man, 100%. And, I know you're a fan of Everybody Pulls the Tarp, and the mindset is always about doing the unexpected things to help, others, teams, organizations be successful, contributing in those unexpected ways. You surely are pulling the tarp in so many different ways. I think back to that moment that you're sitting in the parking lot after driving 4.5 hours, you pull the tarp for yourself, and then you're thinking about not going in. And your fiance pulls the tarp for you and says, Manny, go in. You've driven the 4.5 hours. Get in there. And then Coach Izzo, one of the greatest coaches to ever, coach college basketball, pulls the tarp for you. He says, young man, come down a little closer to the floor. Shadow other coaches. Come sit in on meetings. There's tarp pulls everywhere. It's absolutely incredible. Manny, I just think you're only getting started. I can't wait to see where your career takes you, Manny. This has been so much fun. Keep pulling the tarp, and Manny, we'll be rooting for you. I'll be rooting for you, except when you guys play Penn State a couple times a year. Then I root for my Nittany Lions. But otherwise, Manny, I am pulling for you. Keep pulling the tarp, and thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me today here.
No, it was my pleasure, Andrew. And, you're doing a great job with this platform. You've had so many great guests. And I remember when you asked me to come on, I was like, man, are you sure? Like, I've listened to this before. I know the type of guest, but, I'm humbled. I'm honored. You're making a large impact, man. And I know it's greatly appreciated.
Well, thank you, Manny. I'm humbled and honored to sit here and see all that you've accomplished. And I can't wait to see what comes next. Thank you, and keep pulling the tarp.
Appreciate you, Andrew. We'll talk soon, brother.
Take care, brother. Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Instagram at AndrewMoses123 and sign up for my monthly email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today is a great day to pull the tarp. I am rooting for you. See you next time.